Marcus DeLon Wesson was born August 22, 1946 in Kansas City to Benjamin and Carrie Wesson. Benjamin collected disability checks and Carrie was a nurse. Marcus was the oldest of 4 children. He was a shy and quiet child with a stutter. He liked to collect trains and build and repair go-karts for himself and the neighborhood kids. Marcus also liked to find injured animals and bring them home and nurse them back to health. He was also involved in track and field and was active in the choir. Marcus would always dress up for school wearing dress pants, a white dress shirt, jacket, and a tie. Marcus's father was an abusive alcoholic and a pedophile. He would even flirt with his own children. It is said that a family friend told a story that Benjamin had paid this family friend $50 to give him oral sex. Benjamin then took off and left the family behind and moved to San Jose, California. He had moved with a male teenage relative and had a relationship with him for 10 years and then returned back to his family as if nothing had ever happened. Marcus said his mother was a religious fanatic and was physically abusive. She raised and had her children baptized as Seventh-day Adventists. She would make her own children endure really long daily Bible lessons, and she would beat them with an extension cord. Another fact I wanted to mention about Marcus's childhood, but I wanted to mention it after speaking about Marcus's mother, was that Marcus liked to play pretend as a child. His favorite was playing a pretend preacher and stand there and pretend to preach for hours. He would also rewrite and twist Bible verses into dark and perverted passages. In the 1960s, the family relocated to San Bernardino, California, where Marcus dropped out of high school and joined the Army. He was an Army medic and an ambulance driver from 1966 until 1968, after which he was honorably discharged. In 1971, Marcus moved to San Jose, California, and met a woman named Rosemary Maitorina, who was 13 years his senior. And she also had 8 children of her own. One of those children was a daughter named Elizabeth. Also in 1971, Rosemary and Marcus had a son named Adair. Then in 1974, when Elizabeth was only 8 years old, she was already a target of Marcus. He told Elizabeth God had chosen her to be his bride, and shortly after his quote-unquote revelation, Marcus had a marriage ceremony at home and married Elizabeth, and Rosemary didn't seem to mind. When Elizabeth was 12 years old, Marcus began sexually abusing her, and when she was 15, Rosemary gave the courts her permission that Marcus could legally marry Elizabeth. She was 5 months pregnant at the time with Marcus's child. By the time Elizabeth was just 26 years old, she had given birth 11 times. Marcus, Elizabeth, and their first child lived upstairs in Rosemary's house, and Rosemary lived downstairs with her children, including Marcus's son, Adair. When Marcus was ready to move on, he told Rosemary that either he was going to take Adair or take her van. Rosemary, of course, chose her son, so then Marcus, Elizabeth, and Marcus and Elizabeth's first child left. Marcus and Elizabeth lived on the road for quite some time. At one point during this time on the road, Elizabeth's sister left her children with Marcus and Elizabeth because she couldn't care for them anymore. In the early 1980s, the family lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains in an army tent. Marcus didn't work and he collected welfare benefits. He also began attending nightly church meetings. They were forced to vacate the army tent in the mountains, and the family moved into a sailboat that was permanently docked in the Santa Cruz harbor. The family was forced to move again because a local ordinance was passed that no one could make a boat in the harbor their permanent residence. So then Marcus moved the family into a 60-foot tugboat in the Tamales Bay with rotting floors and no bathroom. The children didn't attend school at all during this nomadic lifestyle. They were homeschooled, but their homeschooling consisted mainly of drawing, coloring, and Marcus's preaching. He would preach to the kids 3 times a day from his own handwritten Bible that consisted of Bible verses that were twisted to meet his beliefs of polygamy and vampirism. He would especially teach his daughters that God wanted multiple wives and that they needed to have children for the Lord. He also preached to the children that Jesus was a vampire and that he himself was Jesus. Marcus had convinced himself that he was immortal, and this is why he thought he was a vampire. He taught the children that he wanted to create a pure vampire race and that he could create the purest race through incest. Marcus gave the children their own vampire names. Some of the names for the children came from his 1,000-page book that he wrote for vampires, and his own vampire name that he gave himself was Javon Marcus Spire, which was a combination of the words Jesus, Marcus, and vampire. Marcus preached to his daughters when they reached the age of 8 or 9 about oral sex, and then show them how to do it. This would eventually turn into rape as they got older. Marcus also taught the girls that this is how fathers showed their daughters affection. When the girls started to get pregnant, their brothers were told that the girls were artificially inseminated. Marcus wanted to have a child with each daughter and niece in the family. The girls looked at themselves as surrogates to Elizabeth, Marcus's first wife. Marcus went on to have ceremonies of marriage with 2 of his own daughters, Sabrina and Elizabeth, and 3 of his nieces, Ruby, Rosie, and Sophina. He then also encouraged his wives to compete for his affection, and the girls become jealous of one another. Something else he taught the girls, and I don't feel comfortable calling them his wives because they were children. He mandated a suicide pact among the family, that if anyone from the government tried to split up the family, the mothers were to kill their children and then kill themselves. Of course, Marcus said that he would stay behind as a witness. So where were the sons of Marcus in all of this? Well, one son started to show his sexual interest in a niece, so then Marcus wrote a 14-page document called The House of Elizabeth, where he wanted to set the sons free. They were to live separately, and when they were of age, the sons had to leave. This is actually a very common practice in polygamous sex because the young sons are considered competition for the men. He also told his sons he had the power of mental telepathy, and he knew if his sons had any feelings for the girls. In this family, there's 2 sides. There's the side of a delusional man that wanted to be the master and a vampire god of an incestuous cult and run his family like a cult. And there's another side to the family, and that was Marcus was a physically abusive and neglectful tyrant to his children. When the children stepped out of line, Marcus would hit them with a small baseball bat or a stick wrapped in duct tape. Marcus once beat his 1-month-old son until his legs bled. The children weren't allowed to have any friends and rarely left the house. The girls weren't allowed to speak in the presence of Marcus and only to address him as master or lord. When the children were allowed to leave the house, the women and the girls all walked behind Marcus in a straight line, wearing dark robes and headscarves, and had to keep their heads down. They hardly said a word out in public to strangers, so it appeared the girls were very well behaved, but in reality, the girls really didn't know how to interact in social settings. When they were at home, the girls were forced to wash Marcus's long dreadlocks, scratch his stomach and armpits. Marcus also made all of the children eat a strict vegetarian diet of beans and no sugar, but he ate meat, McDonald's, and junk food. When food was scarce for the kids, but not Marcus, Marcus took the kids into town and made them dig in the garbage for food. Marcus still never worked, but made all of the kids and the women get jobs at local hotels, convention centers, and fast food places, and then make them all turn over their money to him. When the family moved to Fresno, they moved into a 1,000-square-foot converted office building. City officials said the building didn't meet the standards of residential housing, but that never stopped Marcus from living somewhere in the past. Marcus then bought 10 antique coffins from an antique dealer. He told others he wanted to repurpose the wood for other projects around the house. Instead, the children began sleeping in them. He also bought a yellow school bus, put a hot tub inside of it, and then bought a broken-down limousine. Since moving to Fresno, things were starting to fall apart for Marcus. Some of the older girls were starting to see that their lifestyle was no way to live, and his niece Ruby started running away. Elizabeth, Marcus's first wife, would go and find her and convince her to come back. Another time, Rosie, a different niece, ran away and was brought back by Elizabeth, and Marcus stabbed her in the chest for running away. Since living in Fresno, 2 of Marcus's nieces, Sophina and Ruby, had had enough of living the life of incest and abuse by the hands of their uncle. But Sophina and Ruby were also 2 of Marcus's wives. Ruby had a daughter named Aviv, and Sophina had a son named Jonathan. The girls wanted to move out and take their children with them. At first, Marcus was absolutely against anyone ever leaving the family. Eventually, Marcus said Ruby and Sophina could move out, but the children must stay behind. At first, the girls were not having that, but they decided that if they really did move out, that they would be able to come back and get their children. Once the girls moved out, they started to hear word from their family that Marcus wanted to move the entire family, including Aviv and Jonathan, to Washington State. Ruby and Sophina then knew it was time to go get their children. On March 12, 2004, the girls returned to Marcus's house and knocked on the door. Marcus answered the door in such a calm demeanor, but many of Marcus's wives and children stood behind him in the doorway and had a strong negative reaction to Ruby and Sophina being there. They all started yelling things like, "Judas, Judas," and "bow down to your master." This quickly created a scene, and many of the neighbors gathered in the street. At 2:30 p.m., police arrived at what they believed was just an elevated custody situation. Even though the scene was very chaotic, Marcus was still very calm and almost stoic. Police wanted to enter the home, and Marcus wouldn't allow any police to enter his home unless they had a warrant. Police believed they could work towards a resolution and started having a calm conversation with Marcus. Suddenly, Marcus just stopped talking to them, turned around, went inside, and shut and locked the door. When this happened, Ruby and Sophina went into a panic. They yelled and hollered at the officers that Marcus would hurt all of the children inside. Amongst the crowd was one of Marcus's son, and he told the officers that his father did own a gun and it was inside of the house, and it was a .22 caliber rifle. He also stated that Marcus could be dangerous. Police then called in the SWAT team, fearing they would or could have a standoff or hostage situation unfolding. During this time, witnesses heard a gunshot inside the house. Police went on to say that they never heard any gunshots. Police also stated that the crowd outside was very loud, and that's why they might not have heard the gunshots, although other people that lived in the area, like Maria Levea, told the Fresno Bee that she heard gunshots around 3:30 p.m. She lived a few houses down from Marcus, and she was so frightened by the sound that she ran outside. When she ran outside to her yard, she heard a woman yelling, "Not my babies, not my babies." Another neighbor was in her front yard when she heard what sounded like several explosions, but she also told the Fresno Bee that she didn't think it was gunfire because she had never heard the sound of gunshots before. When the SWAT team arrived at Marcus's house, the front door swung open. Marcus quietly and slowly walked out of the front door. He stood there and he was covered in blood. This was enough for the officers to go inside without a warrant. Officers went from room to room searching for the children, yelling out for them, but they heard nothing. In one bedroom, the police found the children. They were dead. Marcus had executed 9 of his children through the left eye using a .22 caliber gun. He stacked the children in one of the bedrooms on top of each other from youngest to oldest. So I want to name the victims and their ages. Sabrina, a daughter, age 25. Elizabeth, a daughter, age 17. Illabel, a daughter and also a granddaughter, age 8. Aviv, a daughter and a grandniece, age 7. Jonathan, a son and a grandnephew, age 7. Ethan, a son and a grandnephew, age 4. Marshay, a son and a grandson, age 1. Java, a daughter and a granddaughter, age 1. And Sedona, a daughter and a granddaughter, age 1. On top of the children was the oldest daughter, Sabrina, with a .22 caliber gun under her arm. Marcus was immediately arrested, but he went quietly. Police needed 3 sets of handcuffs to apprehend Marcus due to his sheer size. Marcus was held on the charge of 9 counts of first-degree murder. DNA testing also took place, and the testing revealed that Wesson was in fact that 7 of the children killed were fathered by his own children, or lack of a better term, incest. After the DNA testing was complete, 14 more charges of rape and molestation were added to his charges. He pled not guilty to all charges. While Wesson was in jail awaiting trial, his first legal wife, Elizabeth, daughter Kiani, and niece Rosa still supported him. During the trial that lasted 3 months, there were more than 50 witnesses. The defense stated that Sabrina was the culprit, that she was fond of guns and carried gun cartridges around with her in her purse. The defense also went on to state that Sabrina, as a teenager, would play army and even paint her face black and green. In the defense's eyes, that showed enough proof that she was a murderer. The defense also brought in an expert saying that Sabrina killed her sister and herself hours after killing the children, but oddly enough, Sabrina's fingerprints were not found on the gun. On the stand, Elizabeth, his first wife, was asked about her knowledge of everything that happened to her children. Elizabeth at first denied knowing about the incest, but then she said that she was never told anything, so how could she protect them? Elizabeth also said that when her daughters got pregnant, she considered it rude to ask about who the fathers were because her own mother had 10 children with different men. Elizabeth was groomed from a very young age, and I don't think she ever knew what was considered normal. But with her testimony, she was granted immunity, and she insisted that she never knew what happened was abuse. So I want to kind of state my opinion here for a second. On one side, I understand Elizabeth was groomed from a very early age and brainwashed, and so she never understood what was right and wrong in this situation. She all thought it was probably normal. But then on the other hand, she was a mother, and this was all happening to her children. And at what point does the biological instinct kick in to protect your children? So when looking at my different sources, on one side, she would say she didn't understand anything that was happening was wrong. She didn't want to ask what was happening. But then she also says she doesn't realize it's abuse, and that whatever she testified in court, it was enough for her to get immunity, and she didn't get into trouble for anything. So it's a really, really hard stance to blame her and then not blame her. Rosa Solario, one of Marcus's nieces, stood in support on the stand for Marcus. She wore a wedding band he gave her, and 2 of her children were amongst the murder victims. She stated she loved Marcus and didn't want to be the one to put him away. The prosecution argued that Marcus had ingrained it into all of his children to always be ready to kill or be killed. Prosecutor Lisa Gamoian stated, "In this family, he was like Christ himself, the ultimate authority figure who determined life and death. It took 2 days of deliberation by the jury to decide if Marcus was guilty. The jury ultimately decided that Marcus executed his children, and they sentenced him to death for the murder of his 9 children, plus 102 years for all of the sexual abuse that he inflicted on his daughters and nieces." While in prison, Marcus wrote his manifesto called "In the Night of the Light for the Dark." He sent it out to several different publishing companies, but it was returned 9 days later for being unreadable. Marcus is still alive on death row today. He will likely not be executed because the governor of California put a halt on all executions, and he ordered the execution chamber at San Quentin Prison to be closed. Marcus Wesson, one of Marcus's daughters, wore the wedding band her father gave her while she was on the stand. She defended her father after all the evidence that was presented in court. In a final statement Kiani gave, she said, "I am proud of all of my family, of the way we were raised."